Wahiguruji ka Khalsa, Wahiguruji ki Fateh. Today I want to talk about Sikhi and Islamophobia and how Sikhi really is an antidote to Islamophobia. So Islamophobia is the fear and hatred of Muslims based on the perception that they're terrorists, that they're conquerors, that they're oppressive, they're a violent ideology that's going to oppress women and take over the world and oppress minorities and force everyone to follow some kind of draconian Sharia law. Now, of course, that has nothing to do with the actual beliefs, intentions, or practices of the vast majority of Muslims. However, there have been Islamic regimes and Islamic terrorist groups throughout history which have had an authoritarian, oppressive, and brutal interpretation of Islam, and which have carried out many evil acts. However, again, the vast majority of Muslims, both then as well as now, don't approve of these things, don't share the same interpretation of Islam, and just want to live peacefully and treat non-Muslims with respect and dignity. But terrorism is a real problem. However, when we're opposing terrorism and then actually leading to new kinds of terrorism against perceived terrorists, when we have white nationalists that are actually carrying out Islamophobic terrorism against peaceful Muslims, that's a real serious problem. And Sikhs as well have also been victimized by this, even though they're not Muslim. White nationalist American racists can't tell the difference between a Sikh and a Muslim, so many Sikhs have been attacked on Islamophobic grounds. Now, the Sikh response to that is not to say, oh, you need to go after those guys, you need to go after the Muslims instead, because we're not really the Muslims, we're not the ones that you want. No, the Sikh response is to say, you shouldn't oppress and attack anybody. Even though, since the time of Mughal Emperor Jahangir, Sikhs have been fighting against oppressive, authoritarian interpretations of Islam. Jahangir famously had Guru Arjan Dev tortured and executed for refusing to convert to Islam. So here we have the head of the religion being tortured and killed, but not at any point giving into fear and hatred, not saying these Muslims are so bad, Islam is so terrible, or anything of the like, simply not being willing to change and not being willing to validate this view that everyone has to be the same, that everyone has to accept exactly the same creed and ideology. And then his son, Guru Hargobind, actually took up arms against the Mughals in order to resist this oppression and tyranny that was being brought against them by people such as Jahangir. So they're fighting against authoritarian, oppressive Muslim regimes, but that doesn't mean that they're fighting against Muslims. In fact, Guru Hargobind, in addition to militarizing the Sikhs to fight the Mughals, also built a mosque for Muslims, because there were Muslims who came to him for defense, and he wasn't going to say, you guys need to convert to Sikhi, you need to come worship on our Gurdwara. Well, you're welcome to do so if you would like, but since you need your own place of worship, we'll provide you with a place of worship so that you can feel comfortable and at home and be accepted here as well, because there's a place for everybody and nobody has to change. You don't have to adopt our ideology, just like we're not going to adopt your ideology if you try to force it upon us. Later on, Guru Tegh Bahadur took this even further by laying down his life to defend the Kashmiri Hindu Pundits. So this is, I think, a unique event in the history of religion, with a religious leader actually giving his life to defend not his own religion, but Hinduism. And of course, many other Sikhs have been martyred by the Mughals and by others as well, nowadays by neo-fascists, but at the time by oppressive Islamic regimes, especially the Mughals, but at no point were they going to give in to fear and hatred. Guru Gobind Singh, in creating a non-hierarchical cooperative of soldier saints to fight the Mughals, to advance righteousness and destroy all evildoers root and branch, wasn't saying he's going to destroy Muslims. He was saying he's going to destroy evildoers, which of course there's a big difference there. When he wrote his Zafarnama to Emperor Aurangzeb of the Mughals, saying that, like, look, you've killed my sons, you've killed my mother and my father, you've done all these evil things, and describing his evil acts to him and calling him out in very extreme terms. He was never saying your religion is evil. He was saying instead, you do not understand or follow the teachings of Islam. You have no faith either in Muhammad or in the Quran. So Gobind Singh, even though his whole family was killed ostensibly by Islam, it was never Islam that became his enemy, only oppressive interpretations of it. And he praised his follower Bhai Kanhaya, who actually gave equal water and medical treatment to wounded Mughal soldiers, saying, I don't see Muslims and Sikhs, I just see my guru. And trying to treat everybody as if they're part of God, everybody as if they're deserving of protection and support. And these practices, of course, centuries later, now we've accepted them in the Geneva Convention, but at the time that was actually quite unheard of. And the Sikh Empire, which only existed for 50 years, had religious tolerance. It wasn't like, now that we've overthrown the Mughals, we're going to make everybody go back to being Hindu, or everyone has to become Sikh, or something like that. No, majority of their population was Muslim, and that was accepted and given full rights and everything. And women had rights, and other minorities had rights, and there was no death penalty. The only time in the history of the subcontinent in which a kingdom had no death penalty. But, of course, all good things come to an end, and colonialism really changed things quite a lot. But if we look right back to the very beginning, the very first line of the Guru Granth Sahib, it says that God is nirbhau, without fear, and nirveru, without hatred. So if God has no fear and no hatred, and this is the very first line of the scripture, that really goes to show just how much we can reject this ideology of hate based on fear that is Islamophobia. That Muslims, just as anybody else, deserves food and compassion and protection and equality. That we won't allow Muslims to oppress anybody, but we also won't allow Muslims to be oppressed. So, if it was true what Pegida and these other Islamophobic groups claim, that Muslims are going to take over Canada and impose Sharia law, then Sikhs would fight them and win. But since what's actually happening is not that Muslims are posed to take over, but that white nationalist fascists are using Islamophobia as a pretext to oppress not only Muslims but also Sikhs and other minorities, and themselves have rampant misogyny, homophobia, and other forms of fear, hatred, and oppression. We need to fight them because they're the real threat here. At least in this country, Muslims are a small minority and are not posed to take over anything. And again, the vast majority of them wouldn't even want to, have no desire to oppress people and simply want to live in peace. So Sikhi opposes Islamophobia and opposes fascism, as well anybody should, but especially this proud tradition of soldier saints fighting for the equality of everybody and the rejection of all forms of persecution and all forms of oppression. We cannot allow Nazis and neo-fascists to use fear and hatred to advance their agenda in which they want to establish their hegemony over other people. Just as we can't allow the hegemony of brutal, oppressive Muslims, we're also not going to allow the hegemony of white nationalists. We come from all over the world, and we have many diverse backgrounds, many diverse interests, diverse body types, diverse everything. But we're all part of God. We're all valid, and we all deserve to participate in the great unfolding of the universe. And so, if Sikhi is without fear and without hatred, then really it can be an antidote for the fear and hatred-based ideology that is Islamophobia. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.